All right, let's dive straight into this explainer and demystify the completely visceral experience of fear. So often we treat our anxieties like this terrifying monster hiding under the bed, right? Something that's totally mysterious, overpowering, and just completely out of our control. But today, we're going to break that monster down into a manageable mechanism. By looking closely at the source material, we'll uncover exactly how fear operates in the body and mind, and more importantly, how you can dismantle it piece by piece.
So here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the anatomy of the fear response. Second, the three types of fear. Third, fixing the leaky faucet. Fourth, mental tactics to conquer fear. And finally, tricking your nervous system.
Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, Anatomy of the Fear Response. First off, I want you to ask yourself a question. Where exactly does fear live in your physical geography? Because the source points out something really fascinating. Fear isn't just in your head. Not at all. For some people, it's this incredibly tight knot in the stomach. For others, it's trembling knees, a racing heart, a stiff back, or maybe even a pounding headache. Validating this physical manifestation is step one. It is completely 100% normal to have a physical geography of fear. But why does this actually happen?
Well, it literally all starts with just a single fearful thought. And that thought acts like an alarm bell, instantly triggering your adrenal gland. Suddenly, your nervous system kicks into overdrive. Your breathing gets shallow, your muscles tense up, your heart pumps furiously. But here's the catch. To do all of this, your body has to steal resources from somewhere else. So it suppresses your immune system, which, by the way, is exactly why chronic stress leads to getting sick. And it pulls blood away from your digestive system. That sudden halt in digestion, that is exactly what causes that nervous nausea, the urge to vomit, or those stomach cramps before a big event. Your body is literally preparing for a physical battle, even if a threat is just standing up to give a presentation. Now, what's truly fascinating is how your body automatically chooses between three primitive responses, and it's based entirely on how we perceive our own size relative to the threat. Think about it. If your brain calculates that you are bigger or stronger than the problem, it chooses fight. You face it head on. If the threat seems bigger than you, your brain chooses flight. You run, either physically or by just mentally checking out. And if the threat is totally overwhelming and escape is impossible, you freeze.
And this biological hijacking explains a phenomenon we have literally all experienced. Your brain just going completely blank. As the source beautifully puts it, tension is the enemy of memory. This is why you can study for weeks, sit down for an exam, or stand up for a speech, and suddenly, nothing. You forget the whole shebang. The physical tension literally blocks your cognitive recall. And it's exactly why the very second you leave the room and your physical tension finally drops, all the answers magically flood right back into your mind. All right, moving on to Section 2, the three types of fear. The source material actually breaks fear down in a really beautiful way, using the linguistic roots of the Arabic word for fear, which is made up of three letters, kha, waw, and fa. Each letter actually represents a whole category. First is kha, which stands for faulty fear. So these are your irrational phobias, like public speaking. Then there's waw for obligatory fear. This is the healthy fear of crossing moral boundaries or spiritual lines. And finally, fa stands for natural, instinctual fear, like, being appropriately afraid of a wild predator. Now, our focus today is specifically on fixing this first category, faulty fear. This is the unjustified, acquired anxieties surrounding totally non-lethal situations. Because when you're terrified of an upcoming meeting, a harmless little animal, or just making a mistake, your brain is actually treating a social or emotional challenge as if it were a physical predator. It's a complete, improper hijacking of your nervous system, and it is exactly what we want to solve today. Which brings us to Section 3, Fixing the Leaky Faucet. I absolutely love this metaphor from the source material. Imagine a dripping faucet creating a massive puddle on the floor. Now, if I hand you a towel, you could mop that floor all day long, right? But as long as the tap is still running, you're going to be exhausted, and that puddle will just keep coming back. Mopping the floor is like treating the symptoms of fear. Turning off the tap, that means changing the root thoughts that cause those symptoms in the first place. You actually have to change your underlying thoughts about perfectionism, about what other people think of you, and honestly, about your own capabilities. Okay, Section 4, Mental Tactics to Conquer Fear. Tactic number 1 is mental displacement. Think of your conscious attention like the very peak of a mountain. There is literally only room for one person to stand at the top.
The psychological principle here is that the mind simply cannot focus on two distinct consuming thoughts simultaneously. It just can't. So, if a fearful thought takes the peak, you have to displace it. You crowd it out by hyper-focusing your senses on immediate environmental details. Notice the texture of your clothes, the temperature of the room, the specific smells around you. By forcing your brain to process all this new sensory data, you physically push that fearful thought right off the mountain peak. The second tactic is to interrogate the dark room of your mind by simply asking, and then what? See, fear thrives in the unknown. When we're afraid to fail, we usually stop thinking right at the moment of failure. But try pushing past it. Let's say you do make a mistake during a presentation. And then what? Well, people might laugh. And then what? You'll feel embarrassed. Okay, and then what? You'll be banished to the woods to live as a hermit forever? No, you'll go home, have a cup of tea, and wake up the next day. By playfully narrating that downward spiral of overthinking all the way to its logical conclusion, you realize that the absolute worst-case scenario is almost never fatal. You switch on the light in the dark room, and you suddenly see there's no monster there at all.
A massive part of this anxiety comes from our desperate need to control the outcomes. The source anchors the concept of releasing this control with an incredibly powerful piece of spiritual wisdom from Umar bin al-Khattab. He basically noted that we shouldn't stress about whether we wake up to circumstances we love or hate, because our perspective is just too limited. We simply don't know if the ultimate good for our growth lies in the thing we desperately want or the obstacle we are desperately trying to avoid. Releasing the need to dictate every single outcome effectively shuts off a major valve on that leaky faucet. Our third tactic is the sublimation technique. When you're overwhelmed, your problem feels like it takes up the entire universe, right? Well, sublimation involves visually zooming out step by step. Just imagine looking at yourself in the room you're in. Now zoom out and see the room within your city. Zoom out again to see your city on the massive globe of the Earth. And zoom out one last time to see the Earth floating in the infinite expanse of the universe. Suddenly, you and your impending mistake are just so unbelievably tiny. It drastically, and I mean drastically, shrinks the psychological size of your problems.
And we can actually apply this exact same logic to time as well. Even if we live 100 years, that entire century is just a microscopic, fleeting blip in the grand timeline of human history, let alone the universe. When you weigh your daily anxieties against the sheer scale of space and time, it fundamentally proves that our fears are massively, massively smaller than we make them out to be.
Finally, Section 5, tricking your nervous system. Because let's be real for a second, sometimes the body just reacts way before the mind can catch up. You might try all these mental tactics we just talked about, but your heart is still pounding out of your chest. And that is exactly when we need physical hacks to regain control. If you can't persuade your nervous system with logic, you gotta trick it. Remember earlier how we said fear diverts blood away from digestion, causing a dry mouth? Well, a dry mouth signals extreme danger to the brain. So by simply taking a sip of water, or honestly even just swallowing and wetting your mouth, you send a reverse signal to your brain. You're effectively telling it, hey, we're hydrating here, we're not running from a predator. And if you combine this with deep, diaphragmatic breathing that manually expands your lungs, it literally forces your nervous system to stand down. So, the really crucial point here is how we handle fear over time. The source describes this as the triangle of fear. Imagine your fear spikes to 90% right before you face a challenge. If you push through and do it anyway, the fear peaks, but then it starts to drop. The next time you face that exact same challenge, your starting fear isn't 90% anymore, it's 60%. And the time after that, it's 20%. Repeated exposure gradually deflates fear over time, visually proving that actually stepping into the arena shrinks the obstacle.
But here is the ultimate trap. If you reach that 90% panic threshold and you choose to run away or cancel your plans, your brain registers that avoidance as a successful survival tactic. You didn't conquer the fear, you validated it. Running away actually feeds the monster. It guarantees that the very next time you face that situation, your anxiety is going to instantly spike right back to 90%, if not higher.
At the end of the day, fear is just a mechanism, right? It's not magic. It has physical symptoms you can trick and psychological roots you can untangle using displacement, curiosity, and scale. So as you go forward and face whatever challenges are making your heart race today, I really want you to ask yourself, are you just going to keep exhaustedly wiping the floor, or are you ready to use these tools and finally turn off the tap? Because the power is absolutely in your hands.